If we look around us in our environment, we see many things that are living and some that are non living. For any organism to be classified as living, it has to exhibit 7 key features or life processes that makes it classified as living. Animals, plants, fungi, bacteria, and protists, all these organisms have these 7 features in common that actually classifies them as living organisms. So in this video, we'll be studying the importance of these life processes and how it is absolutely essential for all the living forms on Earth. The first important life process is movement. The ability of organisms or a part of it to move from one place to the other is called movement, or in other words, it is also called locomotion. The ability of organisms to move from one place to the other is called movement. So in the case of animals, if we see right from the smaller organisms like rats to giraffe, dinosaurs, all of them move from one place to the other. Now, animals usually move in order to find food, water, or to find a suitable mate so that they can reproduce, or even to escape from their predators. So, locomotion is a fundamental characteristic of life that enables the organisms to obtain key resources and also ensures the survival of the living species. Now, apart from animals, we also see birds moving or migrating from one place to the other in search of food or to mate. Even in the case of plants, although plants are immobile, we do have certain portions of the plant like the leaves or roots that move in response to certain external stimuli like light, touch, or even the presence of water. The second one is respiration. The movement of animals or birds or certain tissues of the plant, like we discussed earlier, requires the presence of energy. So all these movements come at the expense of energy. Now, respiration or cellular respiration is essential as it helps to release the energy that is stored in the food molecules, especially glucose. So glucose contains energy and cellular respiration helps to release the energy that is available from glucose. Now all the living cells should respire to release the energy that is present in glucose for all their metabolic activities. It is important that all the living cells in the organisms respire individually so as to release the energy. Now, respiration is a chemical reaction, and the reaction is given below. So, as you can see, glucose is broken down in the presence of oxygen to give off carbon dioxide, water, and energy. So this reaction releases energy, which is nothing but ATP or adenosine triphosphate. So cellular respiration is essential because it produces the energy rich compound which is ATP. Now ATP is the energy that is used by organisms to drive most of their important cellular processes. For example, active transport requires ATP, synthesis of new proteins, or even synthesis of new DNA to be able to give to the daughter cells requires the presence of ATP. Nerve signaling and even the movement of muscles also requires the energy from ATP. So respiration is essential because it is the source of energy for living organisms. Third one is sensitivity. Sensitivity is the ability to detect changes in the external and internal environments and responding to it. So sensitivity is the ability of organisms to detect a change in their external or internal environments. If we take the case of humans, now humans have 5 receptors in their 5 sense organs. Now these receptors are important because they help to detect the stimuli in the external environment such as light, pain, or a change in the temperature. So sensitivity is essential for the survival, and also it helps to provide homeostasis in living organisms. So homeostasis is maintaining a constant internal working environment. If we take the example of again human beings, our internal pH is usually around 7.35 to 7.45, while the optimum body temperature is 37 degree centigrade. Okay, so our body will always try to make sure that we have a constant internal pH as well as a constant body temperature. Any deviations from these values will be communicated to the brain, and the brain will again act to make sure that these stay in the optimal range. Sensitivity is also observed in plants, as we see here. So sunflower is a very good example. So the sunflower plants exhibit sensitivity wherein their flowers usually orient themselves towards the direction of the sunlight. As you can see here, this is a sunflower that is orienting its flowers towards the direction of the sunlight. So not just animals, even plants and other organisms are also able to respond to a wide variety of signals in their external environments. Next one is growth. It's there in the name itself, to grow. When an organism is first produced, it is actually very small, but all the organisms grow in size over a period of time. So growth can be considered as an irreversible increase in the size of organisms through repeated cell divisions. So this is called as growth. It's an irreversible increase in the overall size of organisms through repeated cell divisions. So if you take the case of human beings, so life starts from zygote. So the male and the female parent produces reproductive cells called gametes. Sperms from the male parent and eggs from the female parent will fuse together at fertilization to form a zygote. So the zygote over time will grow into a embryo. The embryo goes into a fetus, and fetus develops into a baby. So as we can see, life starts small, but over time it will increase to form a baby who develops into a kid and later an adult. So this is a sign of growth, and this is exhibited by all the living organisms. So let's take a plant as an example here. So as we see the seeds in the image here, so the seeds germinate initially to form a baby plant that contains true leaves and roots. Now again, with time, the stems or the shoot system will grow, producing additional number of leaves. Then once the plant has reached a particular size, then we see the presence of buds. So as you can see here, an apical bud is forming in the plant, and these buds will eventually grow into flowers, which are the reproductive parts of the plant. Now it's important to remember that growth is actually measured by determining the dry mass. That is, when we remove the total water content from an organism, what remains is its dry mass, and this is how we see an increase in the size of the organisms. The next process is reproduction. So reproduction is the process of making new organisms from the parent cells. It helps to produce new offspring from the parent cells. Again, reproduction is important for the long-term survival of all the living species. Now, reproduction can actually be categorized in two different forms. One is asexual mode and the other is sexual mode of reproduction. So all the organisms can either reproduce asexually or sexually. So let's see some important examples. On the left, you see what is called as the budding yeast. Now most of the simpler organisms in the nature actually reproduce through asexual mode of reproduction. The important thing here is there is only one parent that is involved in the sexual process. As you can see, we have a parent yeast that is participating alone in reproduction process. So it produces something called buds, which grow as outgrowths on the body surface. And when the buds mature and reach a particular size, each bud is capable of living as an independent organism. So this is asexual mode of reproduction. Sexual mode of reproduction, on the other hand, requires the presence of two parents, a male and a female parent, both of which will produce gametes that needs to fuse at fertilization to form a zygote. So we have organisms that either reproduce asexually or sexually. Either way, it is important for the long-term survival of the species. Next one is excretion. Now, as we know, a lot of chemical reactions are taking place in the cells at any given point of time. Now, these chemical reactions usually produce some byproducts or wastes that the body has to get rid of. For example, aerobic cellular respiration produces carbon dioxide, which is a byproduct, and carbon dioxide has to be sent out from the body through lungs. So excretion in simple is the removal of the metabolic wastes that are generated in the body through cellular respiration or through other metabolic activities. Another example is urea. So the excess nitrogen that is present in the body is actually sent out in the form of urea through urine. So nitrogen is very important for the body as it is a component of most of the biomolecules, and whenever nitrogen is in excess, excess nitrogen has to be flushed out from the body, and this is through the formation of urea. Okay, apart from carbon dioxide and urea, the body will also send out excess water and salts outside of the body, and if this system fails, all these molecules will accumulate in the body, and then this can adversely affect the functioning of other organ systems. The last important life process that is unique to all organisms is nutrition. So all the living organisms need to acquire nutrients from the food in order to support the various life processes that we have discussed earlier. It could be for excretion, reproduction, respiration, growth. So all these processes require energy, and that energy has to come from the food. Okay, so nutrition is very important because nutrition helps us to obtain the food that can be broken down to release energy. Now, nutrition is broadly categorized into two different types. First one is autotrophs. So auto means self and trophic refers to nourishment or nutrition. So all those organisms that can produce their own food are considered autotrophs, and they are basically the producers in the ecosystem. We also have a group of organisms that are called heterotrophs, and these are basically the consumers. Now all those organisms that cannot produce their own food and are dependent on autotrophs or other organisms for their nutritional needs are considered as heterotrophs. So all the animals that we see on the earth are heterotrophs because they cannot produce their own food. Now one last point. Viruses are actually considered non-living because they don't have the cellular machinery required to lead a independent life. Now most of the viruses are dependent on a suitable host. It could be a bacterium or a human being in order to replicate and reproduce. Because the viruses are dependent on another host to survive and propagate, viruses are usually considered as non-living organisms.